All right, guys, I think we are live. I want to make sure in the Facebook group that we are live, so bear with me a little bit. For some reason, the live isn't working. Weird. Yeah, it says it's working, but it's not working. I'm very confused. If you guys can see me in the group, if you can see me live right now, put live in the comments. Normally, Facebook acts much differently when I am live, and it is not really allowing me to skip ahead. Yeah, it's automatically going live at 3:30, yet I am not live. Okay, very strange. Hopefully I am live. Guys, let me know. Let me know if I'm live. I am just going to keep refreshing here until, yeah, this isn't working the way I thought. It's frustrating. I hope I am streaming. I need a comment from somebody to tell me if I'm streaming. And I know I'm streaming to YouTube. That one's easy. But it's Facebook that seems to be a bit of a hang up. So very strange here. Because it's telling me to make a post. Yeah, exactly. Am I live? Somebody tell me. This is very frustrating. Seems to me. Okay, the way to better plan. Required post description. Seems to me that I need to make a post to be live, so that's what I'm trying now. That didn't do it. Oh, maybe I am live. Sorry about the delay, guys. It looks to me like I'm live now, which is annoying that it didn't tell me before. Okay, well, sorry about that. Today, we are going to talk about the right way to make a plan. And that might sound really, that might sound certain ways, but if you saw the last episode in the series, we talked about asking the right question. You saw how that went. So while it's not critical to go watch that episode, I would highly suggest it because it will form the foundation for what this episode is going to be. So again, today we are talking about the right way to plan. And what does that mean? Well, I hope if you're here, you've likely made a plan, and at some point it's either changed or it has adjusted or it has gone awry or just something to say that plans never go according to plan, right? Like the plan that you make isn't always the plan that happens. So I don't think, weird. So I can say for sure that while it's not critical to be able to make the perfect plan, it is critical to be able to navigate through all of those changes and make all of those things that are not operating the way that they should actually operate the way that they should. So we have to ask ourselves, why is this so important? Like, why is it so important to be able to make a plan and to be able to stick to that plan? And the reason why it's so important is because ultimately our relationships, the trust that other people put in us, is absolutely anchored in whether or not we can follow that plan that we set out to do. If we show up late, if we violate trust, if we don't keep our word, ultimately people won't trust us. So how can we possibly have a good experience with another person if we cannot be trusted? All right. So now, so strange. Now we have to look at how we can fix that here today. So we just talked about why it's important. We're going to talk about specifically how it even happens, right? How we end up in this state where plans don't go according to plan, because ultimately that's what you're here to figure out. And we're going to talk about the common problems that cause that, the common problems in our planning, the common problems in whatever, right? We're going to talk about what we need in order to fix that situation. And then we're going to talk about how you can get a live, interactive experience in fixing your own plans. So at this point, we have to talk about why plans never go according to plan. Like if you're here, plans have not gone according to plan. And because of that, there's absolutely no way, right, that you can reliably plan anything. You have all these there's all these disclaimers, and there's all these other things that are considered while you're trying to make a plan that sticks. So why doesn't the plan stick? Why do things not go the way that they need to go when you're planning? And there's a few answers. Some are a little bit more or less complicated than others. But ultimately, what's important to one person isn't necessarily important to another person. And that might seem really, really basic and really simple. But when plans don't go right, when things change, somebody in the mix is acting as if their priorities are more important. And somebody in the mix is accepting that. If there's tension or resentment or frustration around how plans never go according to plan, this is why. So when you have a plan, usually it's something you fully thought out. It's something that you fully come to sort of understand, right? It's something you've indoctrinated into yourself, or it's something that you're reacting to, one of the two. And when you are operating from that place of certainty and something sways you, it's this conflict of somebody else's values being different. Now, this sort of difference extends all the way up to whether or not somebody puts from as small of a thing, rather, as whether or not somebody puts lemon in their water, all the way up to how they consider other people and how they interact with other people. This also extends to the processes or the ways in which those people do things. So how they go about their day, even the processes that they think about to even be able to function effectively are ultimately the things that are creating this tension around why plans don't go according to plan, because somebody from the outside has either said, hey, I value this thing more, or the way that you do things clashes with the way that I do things. And now we have to deal with that. It could be anything from scheduling with a certain type of company to tech support to, how a program on our computer works. It's ultimately two different thought processes that are colliding, right? And it comes with a cost. So if this is a given in reality today, if this way of thinking is just how we have to think, then what does that mean for what does that ultimately mean for like how we can expect things to go, right? Ultimately, plans at this point are an attempt to do things that are less have some kind of sequence or structure or prioritization that's way less stressful than what it would be otherwise. But when plans keep changing, we ultimately end up in this place where sometimes it's not even worth it to make a plan. Sometimes we procrastinate because there's so much resistance against what we have to do. Sometimes we feel a certain way, and that distracts us from where our focus should be. And these are all just very human things. So what is it that what is it that this idea of making a plan um, really even means, right? So we've completely lost what planning is. Yeah, it's something in the future, but what exactly is it in the future? Because at this point, all that we know is it doesn't work. So in order to figure out what a plan actually is, let's boil down to a few just basics of how things work that I think we all can agree on, and let's operate from that place. So we experience time. So these are just things that are true about how we exist and how we function. Um, we exist in a forward direction in time. So we experience time in a forward direction. And because of that, our minds can't conceive too far into the future because there's so much that can change. Because there's more possibilities in the future than the past, right? The past is done. And our minds have a limit to the amount of information that they can hold. That's another one of these principles. So if that's true, then the amount that we can hold in our heads is limited. Therefore, the amount that we can think forward in time or backward in time is also limited. Hindsight is always 20/20, like we just said, right? If we look back in time, some certainty. And looking forward in time may come at a cost, right? Context switching comes at a cost. Having to pivot from looking backward to forward, or pivot from focusing on one particular task to another type of task, change our direction with regard to where we're going because plans have changed, right? That comes at a cost, and that ultimately can perpetuate. Now, to stack onto all of this, we're also biased creatures. These are just principles, the ways I look at things that I teach. We are biased creatures. I don't know a single person I've met who is not biased. And that can be for any number of reasons. Our biases ultimately influence our perception. The ones about ourselves, the biases we hold about ourselves, influence most of all. So we have to interesting. We have to have an understanding of what that matrix of biases are in order to be able to make this all work, right? This idea of planning even work, right? What is this distortion in how we see things? So when we're planning, we're trying to make guarantees on the future, right? We're trying to say this is how things will go. This is how much I most think that this future experience will be. And it's an attempt to create security. It's an attempt to feel good. But ultimately, it's not pragmatic at all, right? This shows up a lot in advanced psychology, business, and even relationships. And it's ultimately not pragmatic because our energy levels can change all of the time. How we feel in relationship to these things can change. And that can cause our relationship to each one of the things that were previously easy or hard to change. Our perception can also change at any time, which causes the overall value of everything to change. If we're here and we suddenly have a perception of something from a different angle, it changes what that thing looks like, right? Which ultimately changes that entire matrix of what we value and how we're heading toward a goal and what options we choose in the future. Remember, hindsight's 20/20, but the future isn't. And so if our biases are influenced, well, this is true. If our energy levels can change and our perception can change, then our biases that therefore are influenced by the way that we're currently looking at planning, and ultimately what we're doing isn't working. So naturally we have this experience of resentment and overwhelm and frustration about planning. A lot of the information that's out there is put together in some brittle structure that falls apart quite often at the first sign of getting distracted or taken off of topic or being taken away from whatever your plan is. So that's ultimately the lay of the land. And of course, we have this question, what do we do about it? Now, it's important for me to introduce this idea here that we can solve these problems. Like, these aren't unrealistic problems to solve. They're just the nature of the universe, the nature of us as people, and the nature of ultimately um, what our desire for the world and how we're showing up for it with respect to how we operate are, right? This idea of being able to fluctuate as we change and still have a plan is something that with a single daily practice and one critical tool, most of my clients can figure out in less than 2 weeks. There's a special offer also at the end of this video where you're going to be able to use that tool and that practice as soon as this week at no charge if you take action today. So if you find this at all interesting, put I'm in the chat and I will follow up with you. So what makes a good plan? It's really important to know what makes a good plan. So yeah, we've talked about all the problems with planning and all these ideas that planning and plans are this thing that doesn't work, but we have to know what makes a good plan, right? And it's important because we need to be on time so we can be trusted. We need to be prepared so we're not caught off guard, and we need to be motivated and clear-headed so that we know what we're doing. Maybe in a perfect world, we also don't really project any problems. We have to enforce our boundaries, and we're doing things that we resist doing but still have to do. So we need to do these things. This is the contrast with our human nature, right? With that changing state of energy and motivation that I talked about. So how can we do all of this while experiencing life at the pace that it moves with all of those changes and considerations? These are all questions I've asked myself too. And if you're watching this live, I want you to try to come up with your own situations, right? What are some of the reasons why you need a perfect plan? And put that in the chat. I'll comment on the sort of approach that you need to that plan in the comments. So if you're not live, let me know anyway. What kind of things you struggle to plan for? I'll follow up with suggestions when I check the comments next. Now, it's now that we know sort of why we need this energy and we know the problems with getting it, it's really important that we also know what planning isn't, right? It's not prioritization. It's not a schedule, because that just creates more urgency. And it's not really a checklist either. It's got to be something, remember, that can sway with the changes in the energy, but also keep you on topic. And it requires one and only one premise, that it's more valuable to invest our time in building up our energy, because then the big things don't seem as big, and we can do more and burn out less. So if you can get behind that statement, then here's what I've got for you. The only 3 requirements to a plan are that they're resilient enough to sustain change. So whatever you're doing, however you're approaching planning, is resilient enough to sustain the change that comes. It's simple enough to do even in a state of overwhelm. So you need to be completely able to follow this plan even when you're overwhelmed. And they're easy enough to remember regardless of whether you're overwhelmed or not, so that you're not just obsessing around this planning concept. And to do that, we need to consider several additional factors when we first make the plan, but once it's made, it's all set, right? We also need a single way to remember all of these systems and all of these ways of putting things together so that we have this bulletproof plan, and it's resilient, and it's simple, and it's easy. So this might seem like an impossible challenge, but I assure you it's not. It's a lot simpler than it seems. And throughout this process, we also have to remember that we can't stop time, right? We need a sense of control over what we're doing, over what we're choosing. We can't just surrender and do nothing, but we also need to prevent overload. So we need to work with those inner forces, and we need to be able to do what we need to do without completely overloading ourselves. So let's talk about solutions, because it's best to remember things in patterns, right? This sounds really complicated, but if we can identify a couple of patterns in it, it's a lot easier to see this as a holistic system rather than a bunch of restrictions and constrictions. It's why, as humans, we use mnemonics, abbreviations, or landmarks when giving directions. And or why we're going to use that here. So in order to integrate this new way of thinking, we need to remember the ABCs. A is for awareness, right? We need awareness practices and tools to steer our decisions and create a trajectory toward a goal. We can only consider that which we are aware of, and if we're not aware of it, it's not even in the pile of considerations, right? And then we need to create more bandwidth to be able to be ready to handle all that awareness and to be able to deal with what's right in front of us all of the time. This will include an efficient way to use our resources. Otherwise, we're never going to reach that target or we might break. We also need clarity. We need tools and techniques for clarity so that we can drive our intention forward. Otherwise, we're going to be second guessing ourselves the whole way or maybe completely veering off course. It looks a lot, I can't share my screen. Boo. It looks a lot like an arrow going at a target. I'm going to put an image in the comments to this to demonstrate that. But if we have an arrow headed toward a target, clarity is the tip of the arrow, bandwidth is the middle, and awareness is the end. One pivot of awareness can completely change the trajectory of that arrow, and one pivot to the other way might be able to correct it. Bandwidth is the thing that allows the arrow to fly through the air without breaking. It's the type of material that it's made from. It's the quality of that material, and it's the amount of change it can tolerate. Clarity is where that arrow is going. It's the tip of the arrow. It's how it's going to dig into things. It's the exact precise, not only direction, not only goal, not only target that it's headed toward, but it also is the way that it will penetrate that target, whether it will light it on fire or whether it will, slice right through it or whether it will just bounce off of it. It ultimately comes down to how clear one is. And if we don't have those three elements, we're not going to have the result that we seek when that arrow goes where it's going. So there'll be an image in the comments. Sorry, I can't pull up my screen here. I guess I didn't plan that too well ahead of time. But think about it like an arrow, the ABCs. To make a good plan, we have to have all three of them aligned, and we have to be able to think about them in a simple enough way. The other thing we have to do is not move the goal, right? So naturally, if the goal or if our intention or where we're headed with that arrow shifts a lot, it can feel completely overwhelming. And it's especially true when the wrong question is asked, which is why I mentioned going back and looking at the wrong question training. So if you don't have the bandwidth to figure out what the right question is, or if you're not clear on where you're headed, go back and watch that training, because that's going to give you a sense of clarity and awareness. Now, without that, things can seem confusing and overwhelming. If you don't know where you're headed, it's very easy to change that goal wherever it's positioned, and you can have the best arrow in the world, but if you keep changing your goal, it's not going to work. So integrity is the top consideration of all of this, right? We have awareness, bandwidth, clarity, and integrity. Integrity becomes the name of the game. It ensures that awareness, bandwidth, and clarity are all in full alignment, and it ensures that the goal that we're heading toward is the goal that we want. Then it becomes simplifying all of these relationships and being clear about what we find when we have bandwidth. So what are we even looking for? We know that right now we may not have bandwidth, but when we do, what are we going to do? Because if we have more bandwidth and we're not clear on our target, we could end up somewhere that we don't want to be. If we don't have bandwidth and we're not aware of our target, we'll most definitely end up somewhere that we don't want to be. So it's awareness, clarity, bandwidth. These patterns, like the arrow or like integrity or the sense of the relationship to bandwidth, are guiding principles in the 4 signature systems that we use in energy economics. So the first system ultimately creates a sequence without stress. This is how we plan, right? The second adjusts our sequence to match whatever we're feeling in the current moment to that plan. So first, we have to get clear on all the parts. Secondly, we have to match how we're feeling. Third, we have a map into measurement tools so that we can operate from that place of nuance, even when we're overwhelmed or pushed past our limit. So we know that we are not quite there, but we've got the plan simple enough to be able to represent. The fourth combines those first 3 things and adds a little spice to solve the age-old question, how can I feel good when I always have to cut stuff out? It's a budgeting tool. not just for money, but also for time and energy. It gives a completely different way of considering how things are allocated and represented, so much so that when you are attempting to do something, you know exactly um, how valuable this thing is that you're attempting to do, and you know what you could be allocating your resources toward instead. And if that's the most valued thing, that's great too. You always feel the best about whatever it is that you're doing. So these 4 tools can be used for time, energy, or money management. And if you're interested in having mastery of them, put mastery in the chat. I will reach out to you personally and talk to you about some of those tools. But this week, I'm actually offering 3 no-cost demonstrations of this system to people who are serious about being more in integrity with their plan. Like if you've heard all this and you're saying, hey, I'm I'm having these issues and I really want to fix them. Awesome. Let's chat. If you're not quite sure, check on how important it is for you to be in integrity with this plan. Maybe rewatch this training. And you also have to be really willing to be pragmatic as well, because these practices I'm going to give you, these tools, they seem very simple, and they don't really take up much time, but they can be something that requires you to actually sit down and look at the stuff that you're not wanting to look at. It'll be the most effective use of your energy, and you'll feel the best by the end. And it works for any intention in any context. But it can't be self-led just because of its precision and accuracy and the nuance that's required to use it. But it can be saved and resumed. So I'm offering only 3 of these demonstrations so that we can get in, figure out all these components, create awareness and clarity around your plan, and then let the tool create bandwidth for you. Put I'm in the chat if you want to check out that tool, and I'll reach out to you personally. So let me know. At this point, this is where we can ask questions. What questions do you guys have? What kind of plans have you tried to make that haven't worked, that you don't think, or that you're curious of how we can solve through awareness, bandwidth, clarity, and integrity? Whether you're watching this live or whether you're watching it in the replay, that's okay. Let me know in the comments, and I'll be keeping an eye on this post. All right, that is it for this week's live Coach with Christopher session. Have a good one, guys. Take care.